I have an apology from the mayor from Beverly Hills and from City Council from LA. They were detained in another meeting. So I apologize that this both could not join our discussion right now. So it's basically the politicians are missing. We are only here. So I would like to give Mark first to introduce himself, and then Adrian to introduce himself, and then we start the discussion.
Thank you very much. So my name is Mark Turell. Thank you, Karl, for inviting me, and hello to my fellow panelists as well. My background is a technology entrepreneur and strategist. So I did my PhD work in collective intelligence way back when, worked for Intel. I created my first software company in my mid-20s, and I took it public on the London Stock Exchange back in 2006. I became associated with the World Economic Forum as first of all a technology pioneer in 2008 and then a young global leader in 2010. So we might talk about those later, but those are two WEF communities that you get nominated into. And I'm also one of the founders of the Davos community, which is now about 6,000 people strong overall that do side events, organize side events, attend side events in Davos as well. Currently, I'm working on AI software for government organizations and for for-profit companies. And that company is based in Switzerland. And I personally am Canadian by birth, grew up in England, and I live in Berlin. And there we go. That's me.
Thank you very much, Mark. And Adrian, could you please present yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Karl, for the intro. I'm Adrian, born and bred in Davos. My family is there since a couple of centuries, actually. I studied at HSG Economics and at Harvard Business School in Boston. And I'm currently active as an angel investor, mostly in AI startups and also strongly in the real estate industry, both in Switzerland, Davos, but also in Germany, investing and developing buildings. And also I'm working with responsible for the tech portfolio of a large real estate fund based in Augsburg in Germany.
Thank you very much. And this panel is about urban development, influences from decisions, and basically how it was meant also to discuss Los Angeles, the Olympics. As the people are planning the Olympics, they didn't join our meeting, but they will later on give us a written explanation, and we will put this in the post from this discussion. So during this discussion, I have to just rearrange my questions because obviously the Los Angeles questions, which were meant to be the start questions, I have to overjump. So when we go to the specific developments, right now in Davos, there was an election, a vote, which was basically putting some restriction on side events and were done for the community to make the World Economic Forum more sustainable. And of course, every community has the right to determine themselves and to do their own decisions. And we as guests, we have to see and behave friendly and so on. I would like to start with the first question to Adrian. So basically, and probably Adrian or Mark, who wants to take it first? When we see, 1 second. I apologize. So we see that, for example, events like the sport event in Los Angeles, Olympics, or the World Economic Forum, or any G7 meeting. These are highly important events. And there are, of course, often some conflicts between what is good for the community and what is good for the world. Is there an ethical justification to prioritize, for example, the global need for diverse viewpoints and diverse political and speaking by meetings like the World Economic Forum, a G7 meeting? How is it ethical to combine this with the need of the community? So how far has a community responsibility versus the world need or their own need? Probably Adrian, can you start with it? And Mark, you can chime in.
Yeah, thanks, Karl. I think it's quite a tough question, and I'm not sure if it's by its nature purely an ethical question. You know, in Switzerland, it's quite the first question would be who decides, and also, I mean, who owns Davos? You could ask, yeah. And I think according to the Swiss system of direct democracy, it is clear that legally, not even ethically, the inhabitants of Davos have certain rights which they're entitled to. And based on these rights, they can provoke a vote on any topic which is in the legal framework. And that was the case also with this vote regarding the WEF. So that's purely legal. Now, the other question is from a point beyond, how much should they look at the bigger world and should consider these interests as well? And I would say the more they do, the better, because we all have to be open these days. But on the other hand, there are legitimate concerns from the people in Davos that say, okay, enough is enough. This is what we can do. But we are a small city of 12,000 inhabitants. And if suddenly you have 50, 70, 80,000 people here, it's too much. So it's really about balancing these different interests. And our direct democratic system in Switzerland gives the local people a lot of power to decide on their own fate. And I think rightly so. We will talk later if this specifically was the right decision. That's another question, and I have my dedicated opinion there. But in general and theoretically, they have this right, and I think it's good that they have it.
Mark, what is your opinion? Basically, how much is a community responsible for the greater good of the world kind, and how much they have to the right for self-determination? We see that this is only put on Davos as an example, as a good case study, but of course it expands in third world countries, expects in a lot of things. It basically when there is a water dam building and we ask a whole city to move out because we just flood their homes with water for green energy. I mean, what right they have versus a nation right, or like there is thousands of examples. It's just like nice for this academic discussion to put it on Davos with the WEF, which is a really important event, and the side events, which are really important, which you with Davos organize. And in how far you think it has to be balanced, and what are the implications?
So I agree with what Adrian says is quite important, at least for Switzerland as a concept. So Switzerland has a very special place in global democracy because it really does have very local type of determination, which isn't the case if, for example, one of the larger countries say, well, okay, we're going to take over this resort for the G7. Not the same thing. When the World Economic Forum does a deal with China to do an event in Dalian or Tianjin, totally different thing. So I think Switzerland does have a very special place in this overall argument. But then I think, I mean, as I read this thing, as you sort of look at the sort of, is it okay to have a discussion around the future of the world? Well, sure, why not? I mean, just like you can have a conversation around hockey or sport or different types of cheese. So having discussions are important. I think if we look at the nature of this type of conversation, and maybe there's a difference in conversation between discussing, let's say, the needs for water and food security versus Ukraine security conference. Different levels, because they have different levels of impact. I think also if we look at the nature of, let's say, in this case, World Economic Forum versus a community. So World Economic Forum members are literally paid up. So their member companies, quite often as members, pay 250,000 Swiss francs per year just to be a member. And then if they're allowed to have a ticket, they can then pay a further 30,000 francs to have a ticket. But that's their members. Now, the town of Davos is a free town. There's no restrictions on who can go into the town. There's also no restrictions on the community. There are actually a multitude of communities. I think I counted when I last was, let's say, making some numbers. There's at least 50 distinct, separate communities that will be in this sort of 1 week in this Davos town. And that's just in the outside world, not even within the forum. So there is no sort of common mass. There's no whatever dictate that can be given to every single person that falls in the following. This isn't North Korea and their version of whatever, Communist Party. Even if that might be desired by some people, it's not. So should these conversations be held? Yes, they need to be held somewhere. I think if we just look at this without thinking about what is the benefit to the community and what are the downsides, I think that's very, very fair. But these conversations needs to be held somewhere. And who are we to say, decide, like, this is the main thread for the conversation and we'll just ignore all of the other voices? I think as a town, Davos itself has been fairly welcoming over the years and has been able to stretch the capacity. I mean, albeit maybe if the World Economic Forum week had at least a major ice hockey tournament at the same time, then everybody would be happier. Possibly, yes. But so, I mean, these conversations need to take place anywhere. And I'm sure if the townspeople of Davos had said no, the World Economic Forum would have just picked another place and the side event world would have followed. Absolutely for sure.
So basically, generally, right of self-determination versus right for the greater good. Was it met with in Davos right now? Just straight yes or no answer. Adrian.
I would say definitely yes, and like Mark said, the inhabitants of Davos have played alongside with the WEF quite well in the past years, and they continue, I'm sure, continue to do so. So yes, they have their legal rights. They get information. We discuss if they get the right information to take their decisions, because that's the alpha and omega of a good direct democracy, that people are well informed, or you could even say educated. If that's not the case, the decisions might not be right in the empiric sense. But I would say it has gone well in the past, and I'm quite positive that it's going to continue like that.
Thank you.
And I say yes as well. I mean, I think given that it's in Davos, it's been there for 50 years, almost everybody that comes wants to come back again. Many people that rent out their place, they want to come back again. So I think if it wasn't good, if people didn't get value, if they felt that they were badly treated and anything else, there would have been a movement to kick out the WEF. It wouldn't have been about, let's say, I mean, after all, this Davos law that was just passed is the most pro-WEF explicitly sort of law that they could have possibly passed. So it's not as though they don't want it at all.
They want it, exactly. And this guides exactly to the next questions. So if the vote is so much in favor for the World Economic Forum, and it hinders a little bit the side events, is there a risk? And this question I start with Mark as a YGL. So is there a risk that you feel that other opinions, which maybe not be heard, or which the WEF wouldn't have time to address, which were addressed in the outskirts, will be now silenced, and there is more a monovision? Or do you think that the monovision is not a problem, and the internal structure will avoid such a problem?
So I actually see this, what this law is doing is that it will increase the number of side events. It will increase the diversity of side events significantly in 25 and beyond. So rather than doing any form of narrowing down of the conversation, it's increased it. But the reason why is quite a weird one. What it's now done is the WEF partner companies who know how much it's worth to be a WEF member and know how much it's worth to be there, they're getting, if you like, first rights on the properties on the promenade. Now, there are countries like Belgium and Saudi Arabia that have been investing in it as newcomers. There are corporations that are doing this. This just comes in more and more and more. So we don't see so far people disappearing. In fact, the only real impact that I can tell so far that's material is that there were Indian states that were there en masse. Those are it's actually fundamentally, it's Indians. This is, if you want to characterize a law, this is basically an anti-Indian state law, because it now forces as part of the extra rule, which isn't a voted on rule, but it's the WEF interpretation. They don't allow more than 2 venues per country. And that means that it's State of India plus a conglomerate gathering area. So it basically stops Indians to go there. Now, that just meant that Indian organizations were a little bit more entrepreneurial when they were there. But what's going to happen then is all of these spaces, they're quite expensive. Many of the countries or companies are very entrepreneurially minded, and they need to give people a reason to go. If they have sponsors, they need to give something of value to their sponsors. And fundamentally, Davos is a platform to give people voices. But if we look at it technically, there's about 30 hours of programming that each of these venues can have. Historically, this used to be effectively the cigar room where people could have private meetings. But over the last 10 years, it's fundamentally changed. All of these spaces are event spaces. And that means you can have up to 30 hours of programming. That means, I mean, if maybe let's just say half the time is there, there's 15 hours, 5 people per time. This means every single venue needs to have between 50 and 100 speakers. They need some topics. So instead of, let's say, narrowing down the debate, which may have been one of the desired goals, even if it wasn't espoused, in fact, I believe it's going to do the opposite. I think it's actually increasing the number of opportunities that people have to speak on all kinds of different topics, partially just to get a return on investment from the space. And it actually creates the space for more voices rather than less.
So in summary, you mean that by restricting the larger build-outs from non-WEF members and by allowing still smaller side events, which were more diversified, so basically it was a power shift from money to content, which the vote was doing.
Well, the thing is that the money will still be spent. So it didn't even move the money around. It just meant that now there's a bunch of, let's say, I mean, it's taken out, I think, some of the tech companies that are, let's say, almost too new to be on the WEF radar. So it's taken them out. The Indian states really were never there for Davos to contribute, from my perspective, to the global conversation. They were there to basically for whatever internal Indian political purposes. And that's why most of their venues were totally empty. So I see there as being actually now a shift that some of those venues, which would have been, let's say, booked for some small stage that still had 250 million people, I then see that this will then create more of a platform to have this sort of, again, diversity, because you need content to justify doing it. So
yeah,
I don't know what you think, Adrian. I mean, you see these things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope, Mark, that your words will turn out to be prophetic, so that the side events continue. But I'm not sure this is going to happen, at least in the short term, because the system has to get adjusted and adapted to the new situation. But midterm, I have the same view as you have. In general, I'm quite disappointed or even sad about the outcome of this vote, of this popular vote, but not because I think the people of Davos that the vote was wrong, but because I believe and I know that they were misinformed. So exactly what should not happen in a democracy. They got one-sided information, and they thought if they vote to abandon these very negative and negatively tagged side events, it's getting calmer. and they are less impacted by the WEF. But that's not true. And the reason for that, we all know, is a totally different one. It's really, and I know that from different sources, that the quality of the official program has deteriorated and decreased significantly over the last years. So I heard people that told me that important meetings, the rooms are half full or half empty. And the CEO speeches oftentimes are very boring because they only say scripted things and are afraid that the stock prices react if they say a little bit something wrong. And that's what we experience globally these days, because the media and some algorithms are so fast in picking up any wrong word. And also that's happening on the official side of the World Economic Forum. As a consequence of this, of course, there were side events, and these side events got even more interesting than the main event. And of course, this is not liked by the official organizers of the WEF. But in my view, it's totally wrong to you cannot improve your own quality by punishing others who challenge you. I think the right way is to accept competition with open arms and to use it to improve yourself. And that's a big chance the Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum have not taken yet. But I'm sure that the economic pressures coming from that will lead to a change in the leadership of the World Economic Forum as well. Mm-hmm. And they will recognize that it's actually an honor for them, and that it shows that they have a good quality if others come and kind of offer an additional perspective. Summarizing that, I think a monopoly, or Karl said a monovision, everything with mono is not good. We know that from macroeconomics, because quality goes down and innovation goes down.
I'm totally in patents, and so I like mono.
Well, we can debate it with the big tech companies. Maybe that's different, but I definitely believe that for events such as the World Economic Forum, it should be much more diverse. And actually, we have seen in the last years, also with the efforts of Mark, how much the diversity has generated enthusiasm in Davos, and how many people came because of the diversity. And I think it's really, really sad if that's at least short term.
Yeah,
it should happen less.
But it was exactly the amount of people which was also increasing the pricing to a high level, so that security people had to stay farther away, and it was a track on the infrastructure. And I ask this again because we use Davos as an example for the other events in other worlds. And so the track on the infrastructure, do you think it could have been handled in another way when it would have been, over the years, more sustainable done, and just not only temporary buildings, but buildings which stay, which basically a plan to build out Davos continuously to accommodate such events, instead of having always knocked down, build up? What is your opinion there?
Of course, yeah. But by the way, that's what is being done. I mean, that's the model that is more and more applied in Davos. But on your first point, I don't think it's a pricing issue or pricing question, because, also as Mark said, the inflow will not decrease, I think, of people and events. So prices will not go down as a consequence of this, and it wasn't designed neither for that purpose. But the infrastructure point is a very good one, and we can indeed could profit a lot by cooperating with the WEF and also other players, more than we did in the past.
Mark, I'm interested on your point. I follow Digital Davos quite closely, the Davos group, and there I see that basically the community is also shaming people which don't recycle and are not substantially correctly working. And I know that I see on your smile that you're also proud on it. So can you think a little bit about this?
In the same way that venues end up having male-only panels in this 2025-20 world are just ridiculous. So I think that it is for me absolutely acceptable to pick out these major corporations that whatever say, I mean, they do an event in Davos, whatever, Accenture talks about how green they are, and then this stuff goes into landfill. I mean, what the actual fuck? So I think this is perfectly fine to call these people out, because to be honest, if we don't call them out in Davos, nobody's ever going to call them out properly. And at least this thing does have impact. And I do see that, but if we try to almost sort of take a step back, so I mean, I'd separate venues from accommodation, because they're sort of different things regarding the impact on the city and the infrastructure for a city. If we look at the venues, the biggest sort of the most unsustainable venue organizers, owners in Davos are WEF strategic partners by miles. So the Palantirs of the world, their scaffolding alone costs 750,000 francs for the setup and takedown. So it's the WEF partners that are to blame. Never was the side event world, by the way. So I think then having restrictions on those, because they genuinely cause infrastructure problems in the town during Christmas, during ski season build-up, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, I think there are issues there. But actually, another point that I just want to make is that we can talk about, let's say, the impact on sort of stopping side events. The thing is that actually isn't what the law says properly. What it does is it restricts who is allowed to have the master contract to spaces, and it gives the WEF separately then a second right of refusal that will take place. But the hotels have still got broad remit. A number of other venues still have broad remit. And those venues, once they're signed up, will have a broad remit to do the side events that they want. So I think it is genuinely was a very, very bad idea. This restraint of trade, picking one over the other. I think all of this stuff is really bad. However, at the end of the day, it will have not just no influence negatively, but I think it actually has in contrast, it actually has a positive benefit for the town of Davos overall, and for side events and for the WEF, because it gives us certainty that the WEF is very likely to be here for 5 years.
Okay,
which wasn't the case, which was not the case beforehand. So instead of people saying, "Oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen," but okay, here are the rules, because you end up with the world's best entrepreneurs, the world's best money, all hanging around with the world's best ideas and insights. Well, of course they're going to figure out a way. They're not children.
Adrian, I have a question. So I was living in Switzerland for a long time, and I quite understand how deep-rooted the democratic process in Switzerland is, and how deep-rooted it is, the concept of fairness. I mean, the Swiss culture with the heroes from Winkelried to everyone have basically fighting tyranny, being their own men, and so on. My question is, how fair was an election when a bigger company threatens to leave? Of course, every private company has a reason to leave. When I want to build a Tesla facility in one city, and the city says, sorry, we don't want you there, I say, these are my demands. I need so much land. I need so much electricity. And they say, okay, sorry, we don't want to give it to you. I say, like, okay, I find somebody who wants me. But now there's a difference. It was an ongoing business relationship already done. And it was, we will leave like this. And there was a threat to leave when this is not done. So do you think this threat was impacting the vote? Number one, was it a vote which was directed just on information that, I mean, it had to change when I see Davos in the summer. I mean, so many stores empty, so many restaurants closed. I mean, the city has to be vitalized and have a diversity in business functions. So what do you think was a threat for Davos and the impact on the election from the WEF and the impact on the election? And when you compare it, Mark, later on to other examples around the world would be also good. If we start with Adrian.
Yeah, unfortunately, Davos is too small to do post-voting polls or analysis. So what I'm saying is only guessing. I have no hard data, but I think that the first reason why they voted like this was not a threat, but it was like really their aim, their idea to diminish the infrastructure problems, and I think that was the main reason, and the threat was kind of in the air, but it, to my knowledge, was not openly mentioned. It was kind of behind the scenes a little bit, and yeah, this threat was maybe there, but definitely
I was
not.
referring to an article at the famous Swiss newspaper Blick. Sorry.
Yes.
Which was saying it was done because of the threat. Please continue.
Okay, so now even hypothetically, if this threat had been in people's minds or even on top of their minds, I think first of all, it's the WEF's organization's right to say they want to leave Davos. Yeah, so and even if it were a bit of a power game, it's their good right to use it. Yeah, and to say okay, we stay in Davos if A, B, C, D, E criteria are met, and if not, we go to Dubai or whatever. Yeah, if this is pokering or if it's really meant like that is another question. Yeah, I think the history and the cooperation between the WEF and Davos is so long and so intense, and people don't only come to Davos because of the WEF, but also because of the beautiful mountains, the air, and the great infrastructure. It's not so easy to replicate that in another place. And also this episode we had in the Waldorf Astoria, New York, what I heard was not so successful. So people preferred Davos over New York. I think I wouldn't say it's unfair. It's just a power game, and in that case, probably both think they have won. Yeah, the voters of Davos think they have won because they believe there might be less traffic in the future. I doubt that this is going to be the case, but probably they believe that. And the WEF sees itself as a victor in this because they have more control on the participants, which is a Pyrrhus victory, I think. But that we'll see later in future years.
Mark?
Yeah, and I think sort of the community has won as well because it gives certainty to the place.
Yeah.
And it has now created many more venues that need extra content, that need more people, and. So I think that it's no, I don't believe that the WEF was strategically figuring out all of this stuff. I think they just picked out something, or I thought, oh, we can get this thing. But I do see that I believe it was a poorly designed law. I can't see that the law actually will have any of the positive impacts that the law claims to have in practice. It does nothing about the traffic whatsoever. It does nothing about long-term prosperity of the town and keeping shops open whatsoever. In fact, I mean, it's a bad law. Not just the restraint of trade and the principle in this, but it was just a badly designed law. Now, I think then probably if people had more information, had been better informed, if it hadn't been 1 month while people were on holidays to actually allow people to have discussions, that was okay. But this was a law that was pretty much passed by unanimous consent. It was always going to get passed. There weren't even sort of whatever young people motivated enough to be there because they were on holiday or they were working in other parts of Switzerland. So right now, I think the WEF and the city timed their law perfectly. At the same time, ultimately, it doesn't make a difference. So it's a stupid law. It's just stupid. So I mean, it's fine that people voted for a stupid law. They're perfectly allowed and have a right to do that, but it doesn't make any difference to our use of apartments. It doesn't make any difference to the use of roads. I mean, nothing. It's stupid.
I mean, I would like to put it in a more global consent because I'm interested, like, what basically this is a big academic field experiment. We see a law passes. It was designed to reduce and make it more substantial, and we see the effectiveness now over 2 years. Such an experiment, when you would do it as a PhD student at UCLA or USC, I mean, we could not even afford to run such an experiment. I mean, this is a perfect experiment, how that basically how somebody tries to get out of a shackle and a threat and restart economy. So saying this, Adrian, do you see, and when we see it like this, that there was an economical problem before, and when you compare it to other mega events in cities, what do you see as a landowner? What are your thoughts about mega events in a city, be it like big trade shows, be it like music festivals, basically where you have a peak time and then a long of downtime where you have less people visiting the cities and a whole other consumption. Mark, please help me.
Consumption.
Thank you very much. You know me. Other consumption pattern. So, Adrian,
Well,
what do you think is, because you have
yeah,
a lot of properties
yeah.
and merchandising your property is one of the things how a real estate investor makes money. So what is your view?
Yeah, of course. It's double sided. You know, I'm actually living in close to Munich, and if you take in Munich, for example, the Oktoberfest, so it generates 1 billion on the Wiesn on the Oktoberfest alone, and then 1 further billion in para hotellery and side events during the Oktoberfest. And obviously the Oktoberfest is economically extremely important for the city of Munich. But it's not an economic risk because Munich has 50 other events, although not as big like the Oktoberfest, but of similar size, and therefore the risk is hedged and diversified. Now Davos is a totally different story because it has only 12,900 inhabitants, actually the same today as 50 years ago. So the local population did not grow. But we have this one mega event only, the World Economic Forum, and the rest is I wouldn't say desert, but it's definitely event desert, you could call it. I mean, we have tourism, we have skiing, we have hockey and other, we have sports, but event-wise, it's really this one big event WEF, and then some other much smaller events. And economically, of course, the WEF is very important for the local population, also for the real estate developers and owners, because jointly with the WEF we can create great things. We can renovate the infrastructure, and that's definitely good for Davos. But there is also a huge downside to it, and the downside is that innovation decreases. And if you go through Davos outside of the WEF, you see that I don't know, 20-30% of the stores are empty around the year because as you mentioned earlier, there's just one purpose a year, and these are these 10 WEF days where you have full house. But for the rest of the year, people are not. It's getting very difficult to lease commercial buildings, and that's the downside. And therefore, so what's the recipe of success in this situation? I strongly believe that we should continue with events like the WEF, but we should do more of these and others, and to diversify and not to be dependent on this just one event.
So to become a Congress city with a lot of events, I mean, you are already a Congress city, but of course you have one event which has an extremely high pool and the other ones are really smaller. Were there any thoughts for you and to create a other alternative economy, like when you merchandise your locations to be more diversified, or was it more driven
Absolutely.
by the economy? Can
No,
you
no,
elaborate on
absolutely.
this?
Yeah,
And
of course.
Mark, for you later on, the question will be, how can we measure the outcome? What from the changes in law, and how can we really look if the effectiveness from the improvement, and if there should have been other, probably another way to craft a plan to revitalize Davos. Okay, first, Adrian.
Yeah, not just because I'm from Davos, but Davos is a truly fantastic place. It is a little paradise, I would say, even from a nature point of view and how it's located. And but the question is, from a marketing point of view, how is it positioned and where does it stand? And there, unfortunately, we have in Switzerland other locations like St. Moritz, Verbier, Zermatt, which are much clearer and better positioned. And Davos is a bit in a vacuum there. So I think we somehow should think ahead and create Davos 2.0. And the question is, what could that be? And my vision would actually be, as I already mentioned, we should be open and friendly towards all sorts of events, but also importantly, in the times where Davos, in off-season times, where Davos is practically empty. And my specific idea would be to bring high tech to Davos, specifically in the AI sector. And I'm talking with a couple of companies and people there who have grand visions, like even to copy the crypto valley idea of Zug and bring it to the canton of Graubünden and specifically Davos to create an AI hub. In fact, a couple of days ago, I had a discussion with Said, the founder of Plug and Play, based in New York, and they look at Davos. So everybody in the world knows Davos, and it could be a great place to bring the smartest and brightest people globally to this place, not forever, but for a couple of months, where they can be extremely creative, where they can at the same time enjoy nature, can come up with new ideas, and potentially, of course, also cooperate with the World Economic Forum and other events, so that we have a symbiosis of the different beneficial events in Davos with these new companies that we would like to have in Davos. So that would be my vision. So to continue with the events, but at the same time, make sure that the fruits remain over the year.
Thank you. Mark, what do you think? Right now we have a change. What is the parameters which we will see the impact of the change? What would be basically the concrete things which will tell us if there was success or not by measurement?
Success specifically of the law that just passed, or success of Davos overall? Because they're different things.
Both. Exactly.
Look,
both success
of the law would then depend on which side.
then success of the things. Basically, measurements and what fine-tuning can later on take place.
Well, I mean, if I pass over very quickly the law, so the World Economic Forum will think they're very happy when all of the contracts go to WEF partners in some way. They will achieve that. It'll be more, and there'll be more money, and they'll be full of side events. But so will they succeed in sort of closing out the only three? I mean, it's basically eight Indian states and three side venues that took the place. Those won't be allowed to be there. So that will make the WEF happy. In terms of traffic, we can look at what was the. I don't know if there are any. If the city actually collects or is forced to collect measures on traffic, people coming in by train or anything else, I kind of doubt it. I would imagine all of the metrics on traffic will get worse. So that's another thing. There'll be just more planes, there'll be more cars coming in, everything else. And by the way, and this isn't very often the side event thing, it's because the World Economic Forum has made it so expensive for WEF members to be in Davos because they pushed up their own prices that it forces companies to bring more executives. So we're not talking about a hustling young scientist who wants to talk about oceans. willing to sleep on the floor. We're talking about 8 executives of a management team from Japan who all of a sudden need to have hotel rooms and space, who therefore now need to have limousines, who need to have all of this thing. So I think now the sign of more traffic is also to some extent sign of success. I think if I was looking at what's almost missing for me, I think what will be a sign of success for the WEF, if we look at from 25 and 26, is I think that people should be talking about what happens in the WEF. That would be a sign of success because they weren't talking about the WEF in 24 or 23. So right now, the WEF, their core content, I think Adrian mentioned this earlier, is becoming less and less relevant because it's more and more stage managed some months in advance. I think overall for Davos, though, what I'm looking at is the word from Davos, where WEF is just like 30% of it, where the stories coming out from Davos, those are the things capturing attention. So I would be looking at the balance of, let's say, press power going into things that are more interesting, that captivate, and then the balance, how much is WEF specifically and how much is driven by the side events. Now, for me, a side event is that if Accenture hold a book signing of an author in an Accenture venue, just because they're a WEF strategic partner and one of their executives is in the WEF, doesn't mean to say that's a WEF event. Unless it says WEF logo on it, which is what the WEF requires, it's not a WEF event. Everything else is side events. Everything else is a side event. So I would see more and more buzz coming from those things. Hopefully it's not increase in price. My actual hope is that eventually there's more and more repeatable productions so that this sort of terrible inflation that we have over making stuff from scratch each time goes down. So it would be nice if the costs don't automatically rise each time. But I would still see there being creativity as extra spaces being used. I mean, Adrian has buildings which are like dramatically underutilized. But then ideally, there are spaces for people to go to. I think it just needs some vision, some imagination. But then I think the other thing as well, and I think it's harder to do right now, I don't yet see them the way, I don't see that the local government is providing the right support for entrepreneurs and sort of locals like Adrian for sort of doing good things. As Adrian pointed out, the city has exactly the same size of population as it had, 50 years ago. Its infrastructure is poor. I mean, we've said good. It's not very, very good compared to what it should be or could be. There's been a significant absence of money. And I don't know whether the money that came into Davos beforehand just basically went straight out to whatever, Zurich, Singapore, and other places, but you don't feel the investment has gone into the town of Davos. For me, the city of Davos's elected officials have a responsibility to help make that happen. And for me, they're falling asleep on the job as far as I can tell. At the moment, with this little law that they've done something to pretend to do something, and they all voted for it unanimously, but it's stupid. I think they really should, like, those local officials should be held much more accountable to saying, like, hey, should we have a 5% tax on side events and use that money to help build up kindergartens? Should we have this to help improve the sports thing? Should we take the money that goes to Davos and keep some of it in the city? At the moment, I think they've just done a very poor job. Now, they historically have done a poor job for the last 50 years. And I think they've become lazy because a relatively small number of people were able to make out like bandits, or at least do well enough that they didn't care about anybody else. And for me, I see Davos as this really strange, it's almost like Davos is a town of the elite where there's just a complete nonchalance of the people. It's okay, it's fine. And right now, and the infrastructure just doesn't improve. So hopefully that will improve. I don't know how, but hopefully that would improve.
So, I mean, going again away from Davos, going to global issues. So, which city would you say was handling good a monolithic culture in profit, like from events or from like a big tourism influx during like a short time, and then to survive self-sustainable with a local industry throughout the rest of the year? What would you say is the best example of a city which managed this? Probably, who wants to take it first? Okay, Mark.
I'm blanking.
You're blanking.
But
Like,
well, I mean, so I mean, if you look at, Olympics over time has had different benefits. If you look at the Los Angeles and the Paris Olympics, those two Olympics right now are making the most use of existing resources than has ever been in the Olympics, and that's a good thing.
yeah.
If I look at people wanting to put money into the Olympics, this number is going down and down because these sort of white elephant, gigantic stadium, or like Qatar has got whatever more football stadium than many country, and it's tiny. I mean, you could basically run across the country.
I mean,
So right, but on the other hand, for that particular thing, that's fine. It's not a problem. So and Munich as an example. So Munich is a multi-100-year, 1,000-year thing with many different industries. So Oktoberfest is a nice thing to go and have a party with, but it doesn't make Munich.
yeah.
So I'm blanking on specific sort of,
I mean,
but I do know like
of
things like the
course,
Edinburgh Fringe, the hotel prices pop up. If there's the GA event in Glasgow, the prices pop up. I mean, that's just demand and supply. It's how economies work.
I mean, as a core example, I would say, for example, Monte Carlo. They have the Grand Prix. Everything is highly expensive, but they manage even to keep the attractiveness through the winter months, which are slower. Of course, it's not nice. You cannot go to the beach and nothing like this, but they still keep the local economy running. What do you think? Is there a fair Is this a fair to vergleichen?
Compare.
Compare. Thank you. To compare Monaco in this respect to Davos.
I'd say not. I think it's the Monaco as a sort of like mini sort of city state has existed again for hundreds of years as a capacity of so, and it also has a special place within French society and economy as well. So there will be many reasons why Monaco is starting off doing well. Now, maybe there was a possibility for Davos to have become Zug and to have special tax treatment for crypto, in which case then you'd see 25,000 people possibly living in the town of Davos, or at least having badges on the door.
Yeah.
These are choices that cities and their elected officials make. But I think to compare a little tiny towns to these sort of city states
is unfair.
So it's somewhat unfair.
Okay.
But there are common aspects, you know, that there's quite some extensive research on Olympic cities which have done well and which have not done well. And in the end, it's quite simple. The more you can utilize the equipment and the infrastructure locally after the event, the more this is possible, and the more this infrastructure is value added also in the future, that the more successful is the initial investment. So it's really simple. So you know, applying that to Davos, it's what we already discussed. The more we can invest the FDIs coming from the WEF in productive local infrastructure, which generates value over the year, that the more successful these investments are, and the happier everybody is. And that's the challenge. And I think we are just there now, where this starts to, where a broader group in Davos starts to understand that, and comes up to and starts to realize that in building projects, construction projects. For example, take the Guyane house. It's owned by Sogel. It's used during the WEF by Deloitte normally, and the tenant there is Guyane. And that's a true win-win-win building, and a great example where the three work together, and for all of these three parties involved, the investment is totally beneficial. And that's kind of an idea you could copy paste and reapply in other areas.
Thank you. So before we had this discussion, I of course had time to speak with you personally, and I spoke also with the LA delegation, which is missing personally. And in our discussion, they made clear that LA was, and they were really proud, the mayor from Beverly Hills was several times on the board of the committee planning, and other people, they also emphasized how LA was able to reuse old infrastructure like the Rose Bowl Center and so on, and that they use the money right now to improve the infrastructure in the traffic with the metro extension and so on, which further will help LA then in after the Olympic Games to reduce the traffic, to make it a cleaner city. And they have a goal to have a zero emission construct of the Olympics, as well as they are a little bit cocky because they proved now with 2 Olympics where other cities failed and lost money and had disasters afterwards, that Olympics always were preparing an economy success story afterwards, that it had long-time effects beneficial to the city. So when I go there to Davos, what and to other cities, what has to be in the final 2 minutes? By every mega event hosting, let's take Davos as an example, and more from a landlord perspective, and Mark from a perspective from an organizer for events. What should they consider by hosting an event, and how to make it for the city count? Who starts, organizer or landlords?
Organizer.
Organizer, okay.
So,
Mark?
I mean, for me, I mean, if you look at, let's say, developing a city, I think it goes into what is the vision of the city and what is being done today or in the sort of near foreseeable future to actually make that happen. Because it gives people then confidence to do more things within a city, to invest more, to go back, and then to have more of a permanent presence as well. What I'm lacking from Davos is a vision of Davos. At the moment, I only see WEF is there for a week, and then it goes in, it goes out, and it's gone. I think other cities for the Olympics, by the very nature of these sort of billion-dollar expenses, they have much more of a vision. And by the nature of the Olympics, you can see it literally appearing before your eyes. But I think this is what I would like to see, is I'd like to see a vision, and I'd like to see action towards that vision in a very, sometimes literally concrete way.
Thank you, Mark. Adrian, final remark. We are basically